Welcome to another episode of Dubai Works Business Podcast, episode number 100. And today we're tackling a topic that we haven't discussed so far on the podcast. We're talking all things cybersecurity, and we'll be joined by Palo Alto Networks, who were founded in 2005 and is a leader in global cybersecurity. They deliver innovation to enable secure digital transformation, even if the pace of change is accelerating. We'll be talking to Haider Pasha, who is the Senior Director and Chief Security Officer at Palo Alto Networks, Middle East and Africa. Within his role, he is responsible for elevating the company's regional profile in the security sector, expanding its visibility and credibility. He is skilled strategically at guiding business partners and customers to address challenging issues. Good morning,
Morning.
Haider. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. So you are joining us remotely. We're on Zoom, but you are
Yeah.
also in Dubai. So you woke up in the fog this morning.
Yes, I did. I did. Yeah. Interesting weather we've been having.
Yeah, definitely. And you briefly explained that that you can't join us in the studio. There's lots of security process in place. Is that because it's a global policy for the company, or is that in line with cybersecurity as well?
No, it's definitely because being an American company, of course, and the fact that we want to make sure that our employees are safe and secure always. We're being precautious right now, and one of the requirements really is to be careful and not really interact as much outside of our homes. So Palo Alto has us working from our homes at this point in time. They've given us the capabilities, both from a digital as well as cybersecurity perspective, to do our day-to-day jobs as if we were actually in the office. And so this work from home piece is critical to what we do, and we're doing it for the time being. And hopefully, as we start to see vaccines rolled out and the number of infections go down, then we will have a little bit more flexibility to actually travel and, of course, visit as well. So, but yeah, currently we have this, the flexibility of working from home and continue to operate here.
Interesting. And can you talk a bit about that? So the pandemic, the impact of cybersecurity. Did you have to change guidelines, change advice, and internally how you operate as well?
Yeah, maybe I can start with a quick introduction for Palo Alto Networks. I think a lot of our listeners probably might be curious to hear. Hopefully they've heard of us, but might be curious to hear a little bit more about what it is that we do.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I'll go into your question in a little bit more detail. So we are, as you said in the beginning, we're focused on cybersecurity, and we're a world leader, a global leader for cybersecurity. Our vision really is to see a world where each day is safer and more secure than the one before. And our focus, or you could say our mission, really is to make sure that we are partnering, and the key partner of choice when it comes to cybersecurity for organizations, whether they be government, enterprises, small and medium, or even, consumers to a certain extent. And it's really to help protect our digital way of life. I think that's the key focus for what it is that we do. If you go back to the question, I think the pandemic has really changed a lot of what we, and not just Palo Alto, but what we as businesses have been had to struggle with. I remember in the early days, this is now almost a year, I can't believe that we started with lockdowns. But the majority of the businesses that we would work with, had to worry about employees working from home. I mean, most of the CIOs that I used to speak with had only catered to have about 15 to 20% of their employees to work from home. And then all of a sudden, or literally in some cases overnight, you're sending all your employees at home, and now you have to cater to more than 90% of those employees to actually connect remotely. And so scale and capacity became a critical issue right off the bat when those lockdowns began. And even today, to a certain extent, CIOs and CISOs are struggling with that. But security, of course, took a very high priority on that list as well, because now you've got your employees and your data, of course, sitting in home offices, or as the office of one, as one of the CIOs that I spoke with called it. And the challenge is, how do I ensure that that security is protected? It's not just about, having the employee take their laptop or, the piece of data home. It's how do I ensure the same level of cybersecurity capabilities they were having in the office are actually also being delivered in their home office. And a simple VPN link just purely wasn't enough. And so to go back to your original question, at Palo Alto, we incorporated, and we've been doing this for many years, but we incorporated our ability to use this a specific type of service. I won't get into the technicalities of this, but it's typically Gartner calls this the Secure Access Service Edge technology, or SASE. And so we have a similar offering, and we expanded it obviously to our employees even before the pandemic began. So when we went home, and as you can see now, as I sit at home and as I'm connecting, the security capabilities are exactly the same as if I was in the office, from a firewalling perspective or intrusion prevention perspective, and all the typical things that you would expect from a cybersecurity element. Protecting my laptops and the data, all being done, remotely with the same level of security capabilities. So that puts us at ease. And of course, to the point I made earlier, I think we've helped a lot of our customers move in that direction as well. And I think we are in a much better shape than we were a year ago, with a lot of customers, and it's definitely an area that we've adapted to.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm sure the last year has asked different questions of cybersecurity, both from a pandemic point of view and just from the general acceleration of digital transformation within organizations. And before we touch on, the important things for cybersecurity this year, how has it evolved? So Palo Alto, 2005, you're named after the birth of many of the global tech giants who obviously have cybersecurity at their, as a top priority. How did the kind of general story of the company evolve to being in Dubai, basically, 16 years later?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we were born to initially solve a very specific problem, and I've been in the cybersecurity industry as well as you know. I mean, more than 20 years, and I used to be based out of the Bay Area. So I was based out of Silicon Valley for about 7-8 years. And Palo Alto, as you know, is a famous, that's where Stanford is, and all of, as you said, rightly, a lot of Bay Area or Silicon Valley companies have come out of. So we were born primarily to solve a key challenge that we felt existed, and that we knew, and our customers used to complain about, that existed in the firewall market. The traditional approach of how a firewall operated was very much focusing on IP addresses and kind of blocking certain types of ports and things like that. It was very much in the traditional form, again, not to get into the technicalities, but in the traditional form, it was purely at a networking layer. Right, and that wasn't enough. And a lot of customers were building applications at the time. They would be expanding on applying additional services for their customers and for their employees, and they needed that application layer visibility. And they needed it without actually having to have any latency on the device itself. So the moment you switch on application layer inspection, that generally in most other solutions would require a CPU to get kicked in, and CPUs were slow, and of course, would hamper the speed of the device, and it would essentially become a speed bump or a bottleneck, in the network.
Can you explain?
So we created.
So can you explain CPU? I won't interrupt in every acronym, but maybe a few.
No worries. Yeah, so the computing processing unit. So this is the what we see in our laptops today, right? So when we look at Intel and when we look at a couple of other vendors in that space, that's generally the processor essentially that gets involved. But
are they the semiconductor space as well? Are they the chips?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. They're generally chip based, but they also use a lot of software on top in order to do the processing. So that's generally what ended up happening. So back into the 2005 or the early a part of that decade, that was one of the challenges. Basically, speed became a big issue. And so we developed this device called the next generation firewall that allowed us to do two things. It allowed us to do that layer 7 or application layer inspection. And it allowed us to do it in what we refer to as an architecture that we built called a single pass architecture, meaning you did not have to use the CPU or the processing unit to do all of those tasks. Right? And that basically meant that we could actually switch on multiple functionalities of that device without having to upgrade the device or the hardware in any way, shape, or form. And so it revolutionized the way the firewalls operated, and we became very famous for becoming this next-gen firewall vendor. And till today, we're frankly in the market primarily known as a leader in that next-gen firewall space. If you talk to Gartner, for example, they've rated us as a leader in that space 9 years consecutively, and we continue to enjoy that leadership position both from a revenue perspective as well as an analyst perspective. But to go to your initial question about how we evolved, what we realized as we went down this journey is firewall is an excellent place to start, because that's where all the traffic goes, that's where all the visibility is. But then customers also have a pain point where they're securing their endpoints, which is their laptops and their servers. They also have a pain point as they transition to the cloud, and we saw that very much speed up over the course of the last 12 months, which we'll talk about later. So security became a critical element. You want to be able to have those security cameras, if you will, in each one of those three key areas. And so we began this journey about 5 years ago almost, where we looked at the cloud, we looked at visibility, and really started building out an analytics platform that allows us to then combine the data from all three aspects using tools that we created. And today our customers who have these solutions are enjoying that visibility, they're enjoying the control of their data, they're enjoying making sure that, from a security perspective, that they've got the right platform in place that's properly integrated. And I think that's why we've become such a leader. And today, we service 95% of the Fortune 100 because of that precise reason. And cybersecurity is all we do. We don't focus on routing and switching and 20 other different technologies. We purely focus on cybersecurity. And everyone who partners with us, the companies like the large cloud providers like Amazon or Alibaba or Google or Microsoft Azure, they see us in that key space. And they want and they build our tools and our technologies inside of their cloud services to ensure that customers get that level of protection.
Wow, interesting. A lot to kind of digest and take in there. So talking about some of the kind of current things in cybersecurity, how are companies looking at this? Are they saying, okay, I need to protect the firewall, I need to protect my passwords, I need to protect my customer data, or I need to prevent myself from being hacked? We hear a lot about cyber hacking and different types of things like that. Haider, are they writing down sort of 5 or big, what do people generally think cybersecurity is to their business?
Yeah, it's again a very good question. I think it's changed a lot, I'll be honest. I think over the course of the last 2 decades that I've been in this business, when I initially began my career in cybersecurity, the focus was always looking at cybersecurity as some form of insurance that companies would build in, right? So if I purchase this firewall or if I purchase this security device, at least I'll know I won't be breached. And I think that way of thinking has changed quite drastically, especially in the last couple of years. And again, especially during the pandemic. First, you've got to look at two trends essentially in the market that have really transitioned cybersecurity to the level that it is now. The first is from an attacker point of view. If I give you a quick history lesson in terms of how attacks actually have started to grow. 20 years ago, we used to talk about malicious code and worms and viruses, right? This is generally what used to really become top of mind. And organizations were worried that there would be some sort of a virus on their machine, that it would eventually spread into a worm and go across the environment. That was generally where we started off, and that's where cybersecurity really picked up some steam. But what attackers learned very quickly is that there's money to be had. Besides just fame and in some cases activism, there's money to be had in this particular space. If I can take control of somebody's machine, such as a critical server, for example, or even some consumer's mobile device, I can request for some form of a ransom, right? And so ransomware became quite critical in you could say the middle to the early 2010s, and it became kind of this consistent challenge for companies because how do you ensure that our employees or consumers aren't clicking on malicious links through certain email traffic, also known as spear phishing type email traffic that really started seeing a massive rise as well. Because ultimately what would happen is if I'm an attacker and I know you, I could send you an email, customize it to a certain extent that I know you might be interested in, perhaps based on some research I've done on you, based on your social profile on Facebook or wherever. And so I know you may be interested in a specific topic, so I'll customize it and send it across to you. When you click on that link, you're going to be redirected to a malicious website that I've created, and then you would inadvertently download something such that I can take access to your device.
And you might make that website look like an official government entity or an official
exactly.
financial institution. Yeah. Yeah.
100%. It could be your bank's, it might look at like your bank's page. It might look like, a government entity, as you rightly said. So, we start to see that really pick up a lot of steam in the last decade, and ransomware became a critical issue, spear phishing as a result of that as well. But over the course of the last, I'd say 5 years now, we've started to see a rise of not just the social engineering or sort of ransomware piece. We've seen a rise of very targeted, specific, sophisticated, low and slow attacks. And what that means is, as an attacker now, I'm no longer in it to, look at John's specific, phone. I'm in it to get certain assets that a company has created, such as R&D papers, for example, that are in their private servers, and get that and seal it so that I can give it to another organization and take some money as a result. I can place ransomware on a hotel chain where I've essentially locked all of their digital doors. Until they give me money, I'm not going to open those doors up, and their customers can't come out of their rooms. So the use cases obviously change, and so those focused attacks really became extremely high, and the sophistication became really high, and as a result, the impact of those attacks also became really high. And where we are today, if I fast forward to where we are now, and perhaps even looking outwards, the focus is really on everything from targeted organizations to, in some cases, nation states that are going after each other in certain cases around the world. This whole migration to the cloud that we've seen, especially pick up in the course of the last 12 months, attackers now realize that customers are transitioning to the cloud, so they're putting up new types of tools and techniques in order to gather or intercept that data, or actually find that data on the cloud. So that landscape, I guess, is the ultimate point I'm making, has completely transformed, and it's continuously transforming. On the one side, we're trying to digitize, but the unintended consequence of digitization is always cyber attacks and the increase of those attackers.
Interesting. Plenty to kind of dissect there. Just explain a little bit about the clouds. Generally, if things are hosted on the clouds, the adoption of the cloud might have been a bit slower for this very reason, in terms of people wanting to have their own servers, their own data. If it's in your own house, then you feel like as if it's in one place. Where it's in the cloud, it's a shared place, it's with everyone. You don't really hold the kind of keys to it. What kind of changed? What was there better cybersecurity? How come everyone now has adopted the cloud? At a kind of every industry, from interesting some stories about, we hear consumer stories about subscription and things like that, but we look at financial accounting software is now in the cloud with QuickBooks. We've seen Adobe move into the clouds. They used to be on disks and things like that, so it happens everywhere. Did they have to overcome a cybersecurity stumbling block, and how did they do that?
Yeah, so I think so there's a regional answer to this, and there's a global answer to this. But perhaps I'll start with the global and get to our region specifically. At a global level, I think this transition began, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, more than 5 years ago.
Yeah.
If I based out even out of the US, we never really called it the cloud 20 years ago. But it was the cloud to a certain extent, when a service provider was hosting a certain infrastructure or a particular platform, and customers were using it. We only started calling it cloud, I guess, maybe 15 years back. I think from a CIO perspective, they started to very quickly realize that there's this whole question of CapEx versus OpEx that they're struggling with, right? So they don't want to spend a lot of money in building things themselves. They realize the advantage of actually utilizing certain services that a provider is offering, whether it's a local service provider, whether it's a cloud service provider. Specifically, infrastructure is a key element of that. So, and this is where the expansion of AWS and Azure and GCP. If you look at those numbers, it's staggering the growth levels that they've been having over the course of the last 5 to 8 years. And so CIOs realize that versus having to purchase 20 servers myself, I'll just purchase it at a much lesser cost as an instance sitting in the cloud service. And so from a cost perspective, of course, initially it made sense. But from a maintenance perspective, and to your point around cybersecurity, that became a key challenge, because initially they didn't really understand what we refer to in the market today as a shared responsibility model. So when it comes to cybersecurity, the infrastructure provider is responsible to secure their devices. They're not responsible to secure your data. So I might use your infrastructure, which the infrastructure provider will secure. But if I post my data onto your infrastructure and I'm using it as a service and I'm paying you a subscription cost for it, you're not there to actually secure my actual data itself. That's my responsibility as a consumer. So there were a lot of lessons learned. We start to see a lot of breaches as a result, where customers had not followed best practices to secure their data on the cloud, and there were some public and some not so public breaches as a result. And then again, you look at our region specifically. We, of course, in the Middle East, especially, we focus a lot, as you said earlier, around data residency and making sure that the data stays within, our houses, as you said, or inside of our borders, which is an important point, because the biggest challenge with cloud that CIOs and that we've learned, with organizations moving to the cloud is you generally have to prove that you still have control, visibility, and you continue to stay compliant with the data as it transitions to the cloud. I could post something on AWS, and what's the guarantee that that piece of information does not move, or someone doesn't, whether inadvertently or by them, or actually wanting to move that piece of data from AWS to Azure, for example, which is a private cloud instance, not a company cloud instance. So that became a key challenge. So when we look at the Middle East, this was one of the key mandates, and that's why we have this mandate is, if you're posting anything on the public cloud, that piece of data has to stay in the country. And now you see the launch of Microsoft Azure in the UAE. You already know that AWS has an instance in Bahrain. We just saw an announcement from Google, working in partnership with Saudi Aramco in Saudi Arabia. Alibaba is coming to Saudi Arabia, and there are a lot more announcements that I'm not mentioning right now. So these instances are coming up, and I think they've been accelerated a lot as a result of COVID, because businesses here realize that they do need to use the cloud. The only piece of advice I have for those businesses is, even if you're using local cloud instances, make sure that you're following the security best practices of securing your data, because it's not the cloud provider's responsibility, it's your responsibility.
Just to touch on that about the cloud being hosted here. So if I'm a business person and I'm looking for cloud services, the kind of rational questions I ask, apart from cybersecurity, is speed and location and nodes and things like that. And a lot of, say, Amazon Web Services, we were told of that. And then, but why is it a bigger issue? Why, you mentioned the Google arrangement with Aramco, and they retracted a blog last week. They put it back up. They got criticism for it. Why is it an issue? Why are people saying, Google needs to be careful about how they communicate clouds hosting in the region? Like, is it a cybersecurity thing?
So I'm not aware of the specific blog, but in terms of, I think it's not just targeted just for Google. I think this is a common statement for all of the cloud providers, is that when you invest in the country and when you're building the data center services in the country, I think you have to be very clear in terms of what are the services that you're providing. Because it's easy to say that we're going to build a cloud service, but cloud means many things to many people, meaning from a services perspective, I could be offering infrastructure, which is, here's a bunch of servers and I'm offering it in a very simplistic way. Here's a bunch of servers and I'm offering it as infrastructure as a service. Or it could be a software-based focus where, software as a service applications that I'm providing, such as email services like Office 365 to my customers, and I built a cloud instance as a result of that.
Okay.
So you just have to be specific, I guess, is a key point.
And what do Palo Alto networks do in terms of the full range of your services? You mentioned the proprietary software. Do you also do consulting? Do you have managed services, or what's the full spectrum?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when you look at some of the challenges I've just highlighted, it's important for us to do really two things. One, we continue to innovate and we continue to see the challenges ahead of its time, and we continue to build out solutions to overcome those challenges for our customers. The other is we realize that we can't do it alone. So we do need to, where we can partner, we definitely partner, and where we feel that it's a better integration story if we were to acquire an organization, then we acquire. And so we've done a mix of all three of those areas. If you just look at the last, I'd say maybe, even the last 2 to 3 years, we've acquired a lot of organizations to complement each of the key strategic priorities that I talked about earlier. The network with the next-gen firewall, the cloud, as well as the analytical capabilities, which is traditionally in the form of a security operations center, and helping organizations build out their SOC functionalities with a lot more ease. And so what we've done is we are offering these services both on-premise as well as cloud. Because again, as we said earlier, we're very closely partnered with the likes of Google and AWS and Azure, because as they roll out their services, when the customer comes back and says, okay, but I need a security firewall, for example, to protect that cloud server, we have our firewall as part of that service offering that the cloud providers can build out as well.
Okay, interesting. Moving into kind of a couple of topical things at the moment, which is QR codes and WhatsApp's new policies. Specifically on WhatsApp, there was a little bit of a backlash because it's obviously owned by Facebook. They promise of encrypted, but they want to do e-commerce. They want to get some data for e-commerce. People misinterpreted that for maybe the right reasons in terms of changing the data policy, and they delayed it until later in the year. Why do you think there's such emphasis on these sort of policy announcements? And do you think that the customer in that instance, or in this case, was right to be concerned?
So if we take a step back and we look at WhatsApp specifically, I think WhatsApp, I think like any other platform, is helping us overcome a lot of the challenges we felt during those lockdowns, right? And even before so, but during the lockdowns, you now have more than 2 billion people that are connected globally that really want to communicate with each other, right? They couldn't step out of the house, and they wanted some form of an app-based social platform to communicate with. Then WhatsApp obviously was a key messaging platform that allowed you to do that. The key focus really is it is a free tool, and so sometimes as we see in the market, when you find something that is free of cost, there are certain things that you may have to give up. Privacy might be one of them. I'm not saying it's 100%, but there may be certain aspects of your privacy. I'll give you an example. If you belong to a WhatsApp group, people on that WhatsApp group can actually see your phone number, and people that you may not know that are part of that WhatsApp group may be able to see your phone number. And that's a form of privacy that you're essentially giving up by using that particular platform. And so privacy took center stage, I think, primarily now because WhatsApp announced the new terms and conditions. And as you said earlier, the focus was on e-commerce and using the data for e-commerce purposes. All I can say is I think as a consumer of those services, and as a cybersecurity evangelist myself, you should always be careful of whatever data or whatever type of sensitive data that you share on a public platform. I know WhatsApp is encrypted in terms of their messages, and of course they've got some very strong statements there in terms of what it is they share and they don't share. But even so, I always err on the side of caution when it comes to sharing any piece of personal information, in an open platform such as that. And Facebook is another example, Instagram, whatever it is, because ultimately, we do leave a digital footprint behind, and that you have to be cognizant of the fact that social media platforms are there for you to promote your digital footprint, but then you have to be very careful of what it is that you're sharing, because again, attackers are out there, people with malicious intent are out there, and if it becomes public, or if you're sharing on a public platform and that data is out there, then they could use it to their advantage.
What does encryption mean?
Encryption, sure.
Yeah.
So think about a piece of information that you and I want to share with each other. So there's a piece of let's say there's a letter, right? So there's a physical letter that you've written up that you want to share with me. What encryption basically means is, versus me reading it as a simple, in the alphabetical order that you want to send it in, and in the right words that you send it in. If there's a third person, let's say the postman that's receiving that letter and bringing it to me, they won't have the ability to open the letter and see what you've written, because what you have actually done is you pseudonymized that data. So what that basically means is you swap the letters around in a way that only you and I have a key for, that we will then use in order to decrypt, if you will, that piece of information. So anyone in the middle can't really read that letter or whatever what it is that you've written. Okay. That's in the simplest way I could explain what encryption is.
No, very good. And I like the analogy of the previous media, previous ways of communication as well, because it just reminds us of the evolution of messaging and communication. And then what do you think, Haider, is the next step for messaging apps? There's been a shift lately onto Signal and things like that, and many others, Telegram and a few others. Where do you think we are right now, and how important a role does encryption and cybersecurity play in the next wave?
Look, I think generally, from a security perspective, the privacy and regulations of organizations will change all the time, right? Okay. And I think from a consumer standpoint, my view of privacy will change as well. And frankly, and there's plenty of surveys out there, and we've done a few ourselves, where we look at age groups. You and I may have a different form and a different view of how critical our privacy is. Teenagers might not. The new generations that are coming out may have a completely different point of view. So privacy in regulations will change. Now, where do I see this heading? I think what we've learned from WhatsApp, from what we've been seeing with the WhatsApp communication stuff, is that consumers are worried about their privacy, and they are worried about what gets shared and how it gets shared, and they want to see where their data is stored, where it's used, and how it's destroyed. And so there are certain applications out there that perhaps can give us that level of confidence. But we still need to verify, whichever application platform that you're using, whether it's Signal or wherever, you do need to be very clear in terms of what their terms and conditions are, and have some form of a statement from them, or at least some show of proof of exactly how that data is being processed and where it's being stored. Because I think what all of this with WhatsApp has done is really created a lot of new levels of awareness around privacy that I think the new social application platforms, or even the existing ones, will have to cater for.
And interesting. You mentioned regulation. This has been a big sort of talking point in the US in terms of responsibility about, and it often is over the years. And I'm sure you would have come across it a lot in the Bay Area with some of those companies. But where do you think is the responsibility on the company? Apple, do they want their new iOS update? They're making things more private now, and Facebook aren't happy. But where does this live? Like, is that simulation can play such an important role? But do you think it's kind of a shared responsibility between the regulators and also the companies as well?
So the short answer is yes, and I would actually add even the third people are the people who create the data, which is the consumers themselves. It's also a shared responsibility with them as well. I think between the three, it's important to identify what is sensitive data, what is personal identifiable information, for that specific country. And certain regulations have different views of what PII is. In Europe, IP addresses can count as PII. In the US,
is sorry?
Personal identifier information. Okay. So it's generally where, if we take the US as an example, even Dubai, your Emirates ID number is considered a PII piece of data, right? So, and so the regulation will state that PII data cannot be either stored or cannot leave the boundaries of a certain country, for example, because that's considered sensitive data. It can be attached to certain things that that you as an individual are doing. So from a regulations perspective, back to your point, I think first we need to understand what that regulation is in the respective country that we're in. We need to make sure that we know what is sensitive and what is not. Based on the regulation that's giving us that piece of advice or guidance, and then the company, the processor of that information, as well as the originating person that's creating that piece of data, all have to make sure that they comply with whatever that regulation is and how to share it. And if they can satisfy that, then I think within the laws of how you're sharing from a privacy perspective, then you should have a certain level of confidence in that particular application or tool that you're using to share your data.
Interesting. Yeah, good way of looking at it. Moving on to kind of last topic is around the role of CIOs. And I purposely didn't bring this up before because it's so, the companies that you work with obviously have chief information officers, and it's, they speak to the board. It's really important. But where's the starting point? At what point do companies start thinking about a chief information officer, and where does that sit? Is it beside the operations IT? Where does it sit, and how do we look at it, and what's the entry point?
Yeah, great question. I think the role of the CIO has really transformed over the course of the last couple of years. Even in the last year, for that matter, the majority of CIOs I've spoken with as a result of the pandemic no longer are individuals that are essentially reporting to the board of certain metrics and certain programs that they're trying to run. I think the board is really looking at them as sort of enablers to their business now, and really looking for guidance from CIOs in terms of, okay, we know now that we have to be digital. We know that, and regardless of industry at this point, right? I mean, initially it was, industries like the financial industry, for example, was very much top of mind, and they were usually leading from when it came to digital services for their consumers. But now you look at healthcare, you look at even governments in the services that they're offering for their citizens. And then with people working from home and really giving that level of connectivity and collaboration, CIOs are really being asked a lot of key questions from the board. And the first and probably the most critical, and that's top of mind, is how well do you understand our business, and how well are you helping our business continue to innovate and continue to stay ahead? And what type of digital transformation programs do you need to run in order to do that? The majority of CIOs that I spoke with, I think, had a certain level of confidence in terms of their ability to do this. Some are learning, and some of them are almost sort of unteaching and teaching the board of what digital really means, and the value of what digitization is to that specific business. So business alignment is important. The second piece that's also critical is risk. The CIO now has to actually be able to explain and quantify the risk that the business has as they develop new digital platforms and digital solutions. Because it's no longer acceptable to be posting information to the cloud, as we said earlier. We now have to say, if we move to the cloud, here's the level of risk that increases for cyber attacks or other challenges that we might see to the business itself. So they need to be able to quantify that, and they need to be able to say that they've got the visibility and intelligence, to move in that direction. Go ahead.
Yeah, so amazing. So if you're speaking to a company, you're in the Middle East, Palo Networks, and you work with a company and they don't have a CIO, what sort of questions do you start asking? Do you have a corporate governance policy? Do you have cookies and terms and conditions on your website? Are you similarly compliant with the European GDPR? Are these the type of questions that you would ask, or that a CIO would ask, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think the most important one is to ask is, what are you doing digitally to transform your business so you are staying ahead of the competition? That's the first question that I would ask.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter who does it. It could be a CIO. We see a rise of chief digital officers, CTOs, or chief technology officers. Again, I won't get too involved with the key title of the individual. My focus would be on the business, or the board, or the customer themselves, to ask the question is, how are you staying ahead of the competition? And how are you adapting to COVID and obviously the landscape that we're in right now, to make sure that you stay ahead from a competition perspective, and of course from a cost perspective as well, because it's not just about staying ahead of the competitors if you continue to have your initiatives affect the bottom line. So how are you ensuring from a cost efficiency perspective that you have the right technologies and right capabilities in place? And then the third question I'd probably ask is cybersecurity, because there can be no digital transformation without cybersecurity. So the questions of risk, of course, come top of mind. Consistency for security, uptime, all of those are important aspects. Regulations, as you rightly said, are all key questions to ask.
Interesting. So I saw a tweet the other day saying something around cybersecurity and passwords, and that a company that doesn't have, like, the basic is to have double authentication password security. And I thought of our organization, and I think of some of the SaaS products we use, and we're say 20, 25 people, and that double authentication really slows us down. It really slows us down. I get the importance of it, but I kind of, think of the opportunity costs and speeds, and, like, what would you be advising people like that? Like, how important is that sort of extra security?
Well, how important is your data?
Yeah.
So if you lose that piece of information, what is the level of money that's going to cost the organization if you don't follow that cybersecurity best practice? I guess that would be the question. So I completely agree with you in certain cases, and I do understand as well that the cybersecurity sometimes can be viewed as a speed bump, for the organization. But then we also need to take a step back, and this is why quantification of risk is so important. You can't just say buy this so that this doesn't happen. No, you've got to be able to say, look, if we don't do this, this is the actual cost that it's going to cost the business for us to, and this is how we're going to be impacted. So it's a fantastic question to say, where do we see? But something as simple as two-factor authentication, we've known to actually prevent more than 70% of breaches.
Okay.
So it's a very simple best practice that I think you should employ, even as a consumer, by the way. And this is again going back to the question earlier about WhatsApp. This is one of the best practices I mention to anyone who's listening right now is please make sure that you've turned on two-factor authentication for WhatsApp, because it's a very one of the very common ways that WhatsApp gets hacked or the accounts get hacked is simply going through a WhatsApp group, looking at some random phone number of a person, sending a message to that number and saying, I need a verification code, or I've sent your number or whatever, can you please give me a verification code to my account? And the moment they see that SMS code from my account, but in fact it's for them, and then I've automatically gotten that person's account information. So two-factor authentication prevents things like that.
Interesting. I like the practical application. That makes sense. I'm going to go do my homework and due diligence after this. Great. Thank you, Haider. Just lastly, so what's your view on kind of the Middle East region in general? Are you optimistic? Do you believe, you moved here from the US. Do you believe that this is a market that will emerge? So what do you think?
I've been, maybe I should have mentioned this in the beginning as well. I've been based, in fact, I grew up in the Middle East. So I grew up in Dubai and Saudi Arabia to a certain extent. I spent my first 8 years in Saudi, I think it was 83 or 84 is when we moved to Dubai. So I've seen this region grow. I've seen, obviously, Dubai's home for me, like many other expats. I'm sure, this is the place where I grew up. And outside of the 10 or 11 years I lived in the US, Dubai is the only place that I've lived. I'm extremely proud, to see the country, the city, the region really change and develop over the course of the last couple of years. I'm also extremely proud to see the work that the government has been doing, especially with the COVID vaccines and kind of managing the situation as well. I think technology has really taken a front step when it comes to the way they're dealing with everything. If you look at even just your services as an expat in the UAE and what you can actually do online now versus where you were perhaps 5 or 8 years ago, or even for me as I was growing up, it's a night and day difference. But then cybersecurity, of course, is pretty much lock in step with what the governments are doing across this region as well. You see locals sort of regulations adapt, to things like cloud. You see those regulations coming out in the UAE, of course, in Saudi Arabia and other parts of the region.
And maybe blockchain as well and things like that.
Yeah, and you see an increase of new technologies. AI, of course, we didn't talk a lot about artificial intelligence, but I think the government and I think anyone should really realize that for you to properly do artificial intelligence or machine learning, you need vast amounts of computational space and you need vast amounts of storage. That's how AI will operate. And many businesses can't afford that. I can't build a data center, the size of Dubai Mall. In order for me to do the machine learning or AI capabilities that I need. And this is where cloud becomes so important. And so the government sees that, and so they're opening up and they're adapting their capabilities so that we can start to use cloud a lot more, so that we can build and start to use some of the new emerging technologies that are available.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being a great guest, Haider, and making a difficult topic accessible to us all. Appreciate your time this morning, and we'll follow Palo Alto's network's journey in the region as well.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you.